And welcome to The Protagonist. It's a Friday, and I do like Fridays because sleep in tomorrow, destroy the brain cells tonight, which is pretty what half the world does anyway, so enjoy it. The Tories started the dumpster fire. The incoming Labor government fanned the flames and is now jumping in boots and all. Britain is broken and broken. Many predict Farage will be the next PM. Success in local government elections and recent polling results certainly point to a victory. A number of ex-Tory MPs are joining Reform UK, and party membership is growing rapidly, now at around 266,000 members, and soon to overtake Labor's membership. Danny Kruger, who's one of Reform's 5 MPs, recently described the party as a bit of a pirate ship with an ill-disciplined crew and a buccaneering captain, but added a powerful ship with a dangerous broadside and a terror, Amy Hardy, to its rivals. So does Nigel Farage have the intestinal fortitude and the temperament to turn things around? Or is Nigel a figure of the establishment that promises more of the same? Farage has commanded strong support from mainstream media, and is this a red flag? Now, our guests are great observers, by the way, of British politics and of Nigel Farage. Will Nigel Farage and Reform UK save the UK? We have some marvellous guests here today. We've got another one about to join us in about 2 or 3 minutes. First of all, I have to welcome our guest, Ben Phillips. Thank you very much for joining us.
Absolute pleasure to be here, Mike. Thank you very much indeed. It's a great honour.
Also, not Nick Cave, because Nick Cave's a bit of a rock and roll singer. But we have another guest here. I'm just getting myself organised here because the order has gone all over the place here. Alec Cave, that's right, Alec Cave, because we had Catherine Blakelock, but she can't make it, and so it's throwing me out a bit. Alec, thanks for joining us.
Pleasure to be here.
Just before we get into dissecting Nigel and whether Nigel will be the next PM, do you think? And let's just start from the end first here. Alec, do you think Nigel will be PM, or do you think the wheels will fall off?
I think it's extremely likely that he will be the next Prime Minister. What we're seeing, not just in this country, but in most Western countries, is polarisation, and the centre is disintegrating. And Conservatives, their popularity has quite spectacularly collapsed in the past few years. And there's no real reason to believe that that will come to a halt and even reverse, because they are the established parties. And obviously they have betrayed the will of the people for so many decades now. So people are ready for an alternative. Obviously, we're going to discuss today whether we think reform will be a substantial improvement, but nevertheless, people are looking for something new. And so people are going to go with Mr. Brexit.
Ben Phillips, what do you think?
Well, Alec, thank you very much for inviting me on, Mike. Thank you very much for inviting me on. I should just say at the outset that I'm speaking in a personal capacity. I am Deputy Chairman and Communications Director of CIBUK UK, which was a prominent campaign lobby group for Brexit. So to that extent, we have skin in the game. But I speak this morning, I should just say, and this evening to your viewers in a personal capacity. Yes, I agree with what Alec has just said. I think there has been a fundamental shift in the political landscape over the past few years. I think Brexit actually was an important marker along that road. I think there's been widespread disenchantment with the establishment parties for a very long time. I think actually it goes all the way back to the global financial crisis in 2008. The UK's finances have been on their backside since then, and the establishment parties have really struggled to get on top of the existential crises that have repeatedly hit not just the UK, but the West more generally. We've had two constitutional events during that time. We had the Scottish referendum, the Brexit referendum. We've had the global pandemic, and then, of course, we had Putin's invasion of Ukraine. And at on each and every occasion, the establishment parties have been inadequate and unable to meet the challenges that have come their way. So there is huge disenchantment at the moment, Mike. And as Alec said, I think people are desperate for an alternative. And they're talking in quite fatalistic terms. You know, this is our last chance, is what an awful lot of people are saying. As you know, we had a general election last year in 2024. The next one is not due until 2029, but there is talk of one coming before that if, for example, there is a financial crisis of some sort.
Alec, as the media officer and founding member of the Homeland Party, you can, and same with with Ben, you can see things that the general public can't. What is Nigel Farage's greatest threat at the moment?
Populism from the left, I would say. Nigel Farage and his Reform Party are populists. That's why they, tend to do quite well, because being a populist means you can be quite politically nimble, because you don't really have any principles that you have to stick to. You go with whichever way the wind blows. So their biggest threat will be populism from the left, but also arguably from principled people to their right. Obviously, I'm a member of the Homeland Party. We talk, we talk very seriously about immigration. Nigel Farage obviously has talked about immigration for many years, but the problem is the damage has been done, and Nigel Farage doesn't have the spine to reverse the damage that has been done by immigration. You can put a halt to it, but ultimately, so much damage has been done that needs to be addressed. It needs to be fixed, and I don't think he's got it in him to fix it. He doesn't really have the long-term solutions. So populism from his left and principled politics from his right are his two biggest threats, I would say.
Ben, what do you think?
I think Alec is probably speaking from a party political point of view, which I understand. I would step back a little bit and actually say, if I may, slightly more objectively, I think he and Reform are absolutely committed to tackling immigration. He and others have given important press conferences on the subject. It is an existential crisis, Mike, over here. We have the boats coming across the channel on a daily basis, even in November. We've witnessed a huge population increase more generally into the United Kingdom over the past 30 years. It has got worse and worse. The political establishment has not addressed it. And in fairness to Reform, they are at least asking the questions in a way that the establishment parties simply aren't. Our sense over here is that the present government simply wants this problem to go away. We're on our second Home Secretary already under this administration. We had Yvette Cooper before. She seemed extremely reluctant to want to do anything. Our current Home Secretary, Shabama Mahmood, has talked the talk, but so far the policies have betrayed that talk. The boats are still coming, the numbers are still rising, and we have yet to see any kind of meaningful detention and deportation. And until that happens, I think Reform's fortunes will continue to rise in the polls.
Do you think, I suppose, complacency is a good word for it, could creep in? Because there's still a long way to go. Your voting is not compulsory. So therefore, you're reliant, as we've seen with New York, with Mandami, it's reliant on the turnout, and you can get some pretty wild results, which again we see in New York. So if everyone's assuming, and we've seen this many times throughout history, everyone's assuming that Nigel's going to be PM, Reform's going to win hands down. and perhaps at this point he will. But it's dependent on people turning up. Now, 3 years down the track, complacency is going to be a major problem. Alec, what do you think? Do you think we or Reform have got to be careful here? Because again, if you assume something, what do they say? Don't make an ass of you or me, and that's what could possibly happen. What do you think?
Well, certainly when you had the Brexit vote, it was narrowly won. Why? Because it was difficult to get the types of people that would vote for Brexit to actually go to the ballot box and put their vote in. So that may well could be a problem. However, I think the reality is that the majority of the people voting Reform will be people that obviously used to vote Tory, though increasingly they're getting ex-Labour supporters as well. So Nigel's not really picking up votes from the people that have been left behind and forgotten. He's riding off general voters disenfranchised, the people that actually go to the ballot box. Those are where he's going to get lots of votes from, because those people have got to vote for something. So you're always going to have those people. If he can get the disenfranchised to come out as well, even better. But there obviously is increasing apathy towards politics in our country. I think Ben brought up the word existential twice. And there is very much a sense of either things can't change, or if we have any hope of it changing, we've only got 1 or 2 election cycles. And I just want to address why that is. And it's because obviously we've got mass immigration. If you give, the foreign population the right to vote, then they're obviously going to dilute the Indigenous people's vote. So that you're going to disempower the Indigenous people. And that's what people are feeling, that they are losing control of their own country. And so it's perfectly understandable why there's this existential feeling, because ordinarily, countries, they go through good times, they go through bad times. But during the bad times, people don't genuinely think, oh my gosh, the nation is over. Whereas it's a little bit different these days because of the type of threat the nation is facing.
Yeah, I do agree. I think the things are entirely different from any other election, because you have an attack from your own government, from within. What challenges does that? I mean, one would say that everybody would be like having a breath of fresh air when we have the next election, because Nigel will get in. But I go back to what I was saying to Alec, Ben, the complacency or apathy. Because if you assume something, you can bet your bottom dollar it's not going to happen. How does Nigel Farage and Reform UK, how do they safeguard against this?
Yeah. Well, thank you, Mike. I mean, the sense I'm picking up, and I pick it up on the news wires, I pick it up talking to people round and about, or wherever I travel, that there is a real sense of quiet fury, and I would use that word fury, at the state of this country. Every day, for example, yesterday, we had another incident where a prisoner was released from prison by mistake and is now out on the rampage. And endangering the lives of ordinary people. We're seeing increasingly these kinds of stories breaking on a daily basis. I think the mood at the moment, Mike, is one, as I say, of quiet fury. And if that mood persists, then I think Reform can see a clear path to victory. I've just pick up on their popularity around the country in terms of the demographics that they're appealing to. I think it would be inaccurate to say that they're simply appealing to disaffected Tories, though that is certainly true. If you look at where they're really picking up votes, it's in the former Labour heartlands of the Midlands and the industrial north, and also in Wales. We've just recently had a by-election in South Wales, which was part of, this was Labour heartland. This was the iron and steel communities of past years. And Reform came within a whisker of actually winning one of the safest Labour seats that there is in the country. So that is the sense, I think, of anger and the sense of change that is going on. Reform, I think, you could characterise them as a small c conservative, small p patriotic party in a way that the mainstream parties simply aren't any longer. And not only are people feeling vulnerable economically, but I think in terms of culture and in terms of their traditional values, there is a sense that the traditional parties are leaving those behind as well and are simply not reflecting those views and values of ordinary people. And that is where Reform has come in and said, yes, we are proud to be British. We are proud to wave the Union flag. We are a party of faith, flag and family. And I think it is that cultural element that is fueling the popularity beneath the seat of Reform, so to speak. How long that continues, I don't know. You are absolutely right. There's another 3 years before the election. Will that sense of anger, that sense of determined anger and quiet fury that I mentioned continue over that period? The nearest parallel I can remember, Mike, so far as elections over here were concerned, was in the early 1990s. John Major was our Prime Minister for 5 years, from 1992 to 1997. And there was a huge economic fiasco at the beginning of his prime ministership, from which he never recovered. And it set the political weather for the rest of that parliament. They predicted then in 1992-93 that the Tories would be wiped out, and so it proved in 1997. We may have something similar coming along today.
I'm just thinking, gentlemen, Nigel Farage to me seems like he's an individual, and that the team follows the individual. In sport, there's a saying that a team of champions will always be beaten by a champion team. Do you think there's too much emphasis on Nigel Farage as the messiah, the one that's going to lead the UK out of this mud, this terrible things that are happening at the UK at the moment? Or do you think maybe, Alec, we need to focus not just on Nigel, but a lot more on Reform UK and its members, its future government?
Well, absolutely. That would be the healthy scenario. But the reason why Nigel is held up as the poster boy is because that's the way Nigel likes it. Nigel, as we know, as many anecdotes can be told from people that have worked with him, he does not like to be outshone. And the most extreme example of this was earlier this year when he booted Rupert Lowe out of Reform, and did it very viciously as well, because Rupert was becoming increasingly popular with his, radical rhetoric. It wasn't because anything Rupert Lowe was saying was particularly beyond the pale or outrageous. It's because it was popular, and thus he was becoming popular. And Nigel can't deal with that. He always has to be perceived as the most competent, the most charismatic man in the room. And that's not healthy, because what happens is you keep talent out. So yeah, we may well get a Reform government, but how many of the people around him, how many people are going to be ministers and what have you, going to be competent people? And are they going to be confident people that can exercise their own political judgment, or are they just going to all be yes men? And so you could have a government where, Nigel, everything that happens does so on Nigel's say-so, but the leader is one man and leaders make mistakes. And so if he's in total control and he makes a series of errors, that can be really, really devastating. So, yes, it's not healthy that we have this culture of seeing Nigel as the messiah. The culture within Reform is again, not meritocratic. So that's why I'm not particularly optimistic that they will do a great job fixing the country, because it's all about Nigel's political career, not actually getting a competent vessel in power to actually straighten the country out.
Ben, I'm sure you
Yeah.
have something to say to that.
Yeah, I would fully concur with that. Actually, that is the Achilles heel of reform at the moment. It is seen, rightly or wrongly, as a one-man band. Nigel dominates the show, as we know. He has a track record of falling out with people. Goes all the way back to the Brexit Party and to UKIP before that. People that we thought were very good spokespeople for those parties, and for whatever reason, he seems to have fallen out with them. It's also worth noting, Mike, that Reform have been conducting press conferences on policy over the last few weeks, on crime, on immigration, and on the economy. And Nigel has been dominating those rather than potential spokesman for those departments. The most recent press conference they had was on the economy. And many of us felt that his deputy, Richard Tice, ought to have been chairing that. And instead of which, it was Nigel who dominated proceedings. Richard wasn't actually there. That, I think, is a matter of some considerable concern. And it remains to be seen what happens after the local elections in May next year, when potentially Reform could have hundreds and hundreds of more seats, hundreds of more councillors. And I know that they're embarking on a recruitment drive at the moment, but the proof will be in the team that eventually emerges. I know in their party conference in September, Nigel picked up a football shirt and said, "I'm number 10," and he had a team behind him. He said, "We are now a team." I don't think people are convinced by that yet. They've got a handful of MPs of varying abilities. But that is all we've seen so far. He's fallen out with Rupert Lowe, and he's fallen out with Ben Habib, who are both extremely accomplished individuals in their own right, very successful business people in their own right. And so it is worrying that he lost the support of those two, because I think they were critical at the outset when Reform was established. So I would agree with Alec on this one. This is the Achilles heel of Reform. Yeah.
We got a comment come in. Lowering the voting age to 16 favours the left and the migrant vote. This person also says we also have to worry about the enormous postal vote, which is open to abuse. We've seen already in some circumstances already. Ben, you mentioned Nigel, number 10, his team behind him. Nigel actually needs to be probably a bit further back and surrounded by some very good people. Alec, could you? I know it's early days, but take Nigel out of the whole picture at the moment. Who else is there that is competent enough to either lead Reform UK that they haven't gotten rid of? Because don't forget, even as councillors, they lost 40 councillors just of late. So people are leaving. They're not jumping in the sinking ship by any stretch, but there is talk, some rumblings out there. So if Nigel wasn't Nigel, he wasn't there, who else would take his place that they haven't gotten rid of?
Well, I think it's easy for people to forget that Nigel wasn't even leading Reform before last summer. It was Richard Tice. Nigel only came back just before the general election and has remained the leader since. And Reform was gaining in popularity when Richard Tice was the leader. Now, I don't think Richard Tice is the most charismatic man ever. I don't find him particularly inspiring. He is very much a kind of plain Jane businessman archetype. But nevertheless, Reform were gaining in popularity. And that's because of the treachery of the Labour Party and the Tory Party. So, yeah, even if you didn't have Nigel Farage I think they'd still be growing. Would they have gotten as popular as fast as they have? And they have grown with popularity considerably in just the past 12 months. No, probably not, because Nigel does have that kind of star power about him, but they would still grow. So you've got Richard Tice, you've got others, Hamza Yusuf. I'm not too sure if people want to vote for a Sri Lankan Muslim to be the leader of their political party, or indeed be the prime minister. But if Nigel wasn't the leader, you may well have a change of culture in the Reform Party, and you might have more competent, charismatic people join, because they wouldn't have a paranoid leader trying to suppress them from shining, like we currently have with Nigel as the leader now.
Ben, what do you think?
Yes, I agree with a lot of that, actually. Nigel is both Reform's greatest strength and in some and by some margin also their weakness, because he's such a compelling performer, and he is an outstanding media performer. I think he's the outstanding political communicator of his generation. We had Boris Johnson before, a different figure, but nonetheless one who was able to attract attention. And before that, I would say the one prior to that would have been Tony Blair. Nigel is a compelling communicator. There's no question about that. He is a Pied Piper figure, and people do follow him. But we can't just have one leader. We need a team, a credible team around him, a credible foreign secretary, a credible defense secretary, a credible chancellor, a credible business minister, and a credible home secretary who's going to get a grip on immigration and law and order. And it remains to be seen who these people will be, Mike. As I say, I don't think we're going to know really until the May elections of next year. I hope I'm wrong. I hope others come along. I dare say there will be by-elections between now and then, and during the rest of this Parliament. And it remains to be seen what sort of candidates they put up. But there's no question that the party at the moment is Nigel. He outshines his colleagues to a considerable degree. I think Richard Tice is growing into it, and I think he would be a chancellor of some substance. But nonetheless, as Alec said, he's quite a wooden performer. He's not a natural engager with the wider British public. So at the moment, it is a case of watch this space. And I think Alec's observations are well merited.
It's interesting because we're still not sure of the makeup. We're not sure of the team to play. Your favourite team is going to run out and win a cup, we hope, but we haven't yet selected the final team. So we're still adding and moving the chess players around. I'm just wondering, though, is it good that the Tories, who were just dreadful last election, and they've been dreadful for a long time, just that Labor got themselves organised this time. I'm just wondering, though, the amount of Tories that the arms are coming out. I love you, Nigel. I want to be part of your success. Being a part of his success they could also bring him down, couldn't they? Because there was a lot of disdain towards the Tories in the last election. Is it wise, do you think, Alec, that we should bring in more of the Tories, or do you think maybe we should say to them, have a rest on the bench for a while and come back and see us when we call you?
Well, I think having a handful of Tories come over is politically advantageous in that it makes your party look like, oh, we're now on the ascendancy. They're on the decline. They want to come over and join us. So it gives Reform that kind of momentum and buzz that established politicians are moving over to it. But the danger is, if you have too many Tory politicians join Reform, then people will say, how on earth is this going to be a party any different from the Conservative Party, of which I'm withdrawing voting for, because you're just transplanting all of the treacherous Tories into the Reform Party. And so if you just keep getting Tories jumping over, that could actually be something that damages Reform's radical credibility, or its perception to be radical, because it's got too many established people joining it. And people are not only sick of the old parties, they want new blood in politics. Many of the MPs that sit in Westminster have been politicians for many years, re-elected many times. I think people want to see brand new people who have never been in politics before or never been elected to Westminster in the House of Commons should Reform form a government. They don't want a sizable proportion of those MPs to be Tories. So obviously, if you had a lot of Tories jump over, it would have to be a political decision for Nigel to outright ban them. It's not really something that typically happens, but it might be something he'd have to do if he became so popular and so many sitting Tory MPs really were desperate to keep a hold of their seats. You could see maybe in a couple of years' time loads of them try and jump ship, and Nigel has to make the decision whether he allows them to do so.
Just pushing buttons here, and there's all sorts of things happening. What do you think, Ben?
Yes, there is one significant member of Parliament from the Tory party who came over to Reform, called Danny Kruger. He is interesting because he doesn't fit a stereotypical Tory profile necessarily. He is very much an intellectual, and I think of the various defections that have taken place, I think he is the most interesting. What we don't yet have from Reform, not only do we not have the personnel, we're not entirely clear about their underlying governing philosophy. What is it that actually drives them? What are their values? What are they for? And I think they need some intellectual heavyweights as part of their team in order to tie these various threads together. How do you reconcile thrusting go-ahead entrepreneurs who want to make a lot of money on the one hand with those communities that have been left behind in the Midlands and the North elsewhere? Do you believe in a big state or do you believe in a small state? And I think Danny Kruger's defection to Reform, I think will help to try and pull those various threads together so that Reform can actually produce a coherent philosophical narrative that people can understand. So I think he's the most interesting defection so far. But their challenge fundamentally, as I say, is to attract both disaffected Tories, but they're also trying to eat into Labour's heartlands as well. And how you weld that coalition together, practically and philosophically, I think is the central challenge they've got over the next few years.
Robin Tilbrook's joined us, the chairman of the English Democrats. Robin, and a very good friend of our station too. We're just talking about, Robin, about the Tories. Is it such a wise thing to bring the Tories over, or should they be benched for a few more years yet? And will that harm if they do bring these Tories in? You've heard a great deal of the conversation. If they do bring more Tories in, will it do damage to Reform?
I liked what both Alec and Ben had said, but I think perhaps what we're talking about here is something that I would naturally also feel an affinity to, which is the ideas behind politics. Whereas, in fact, of course, the vast majority of voters are not particularly interested in ideas, and what they're mostly interested in, it seemed, when we had the two establishment parties, is whether their father and grandfather had voted that way before. When you were banging on the door, you'd often get, they were going to vote for whichever party was their family's party, and they were identifying with that party. I think with Reform, we've got a slightly different phenomenon. And what we've got is something that I think I could reflect on, I could sort of get into by mentioning what a conversation I had with Nigel Farage the first time I met him. This was at the Bromley by-election, which is quite a few years ago now. The Conservative MP had died, and UKIP, with Nigel Farage as leader, were making a really big effort to try and make the breakthrough and win that by-election. They had distributed they'd done 19 leaflet drops in that by-election, so they'd really gone to town on it. He said, when I asked him how he thought he was going to do at the beginning of the count, he had thought he was going to do quite well. He might even have been elected until about a week before, when he banged on the door of a house, and a woman answered, and she came out and she said, "Oh, Nigel, I really agree with everything you stand for. I admire you tremendously. I desperately want out of the EU, but I'm going to vote for the Lib Dem," she said. In order to get the Tory out, she said. So there's a woman who's saying, and after all, she is a floating voter. This is the where she'd be categorised. She's a floating voter who's saying that she is going to vote for the party that is most opposite to everything that she says she believes in order to get the establishment party out. And I think that's where Reform are now. Reform are now seen as being a party which you can vote for, and there's a reasonable chance they will actually be elected and get the establishment party out. I mean, you can't explain their success in, for instance, Runcorn, very marginal as it was. You can't explain it by their policies and Sarah Pochin's charisma. What's happened there is people have thought, we want to get Labour out, and they have voted for the party that they think is most likely to get Labour out in that constituency. Yeah. And I think, therefore, it's not exactly on the way that the majority of voters are thinking about things to talk about Reform's politics. And if we are going to talk about Reform's politics, we've got to look at Nigel Farage's politics. I mean, the guy has repeatedly said he was a Thatcherite. He's still a Thatcherite, as far as we know. He believes in small state, low tax, and all the things that a city person like him used to believe in way back in the 70s. So he's not his personal politics are not the sort of politics which should actually be very attractive to the so-called Red Wall Labour voters in the north. His ideas of how the economy would run wouldn't be attractive to them, because they mostly are concerned about state provision in terms of economics. I think actually too much concentration on the ideological foundations would be a problem for him. But I did like what Ben was saying about Danny Kruger. I mean, he is definitely a thinker with a long tradition of it. But his thoughts are going to be the thoughts, again, probably wouldn't much appeal to the voters that we think that Reform's trying to appeal to. In other words, the Red Wall up in the north. So that would be my reaction.
By the way, if you want to just jump in, you can. By the way,
so, I was just going to pick up on something Robin said, if I may, Mike, which is that it is the old cliche that oppositions don't win elections, governments. And that is undoubtedly the case. Tony Blair won a landslide in 1997. Yes, he was a charismatic leader, but people had had 18 years of Conservative government, and things had gone badly in those latter years, and people were fed up to the back teeth of them. And I think that there is just similar disenchantment with what we call the unit party now. In other words, the Tories and Labour. They've each passed the baton one to another over the last 30 years, and yet the trajectory of the country has continued to decline. And so it is in that spirit, I think, that they are increasingly looking to reform. But as we've said repeatedly throughout this discussion, how Nigel weaves that coalition between those in the north and those in the south. I think that's the critical thing. I will be very interested to see how they develop economic policy. There is an interesting debate going on the right, actually, I think not just here, but in the United States and elsewhere, between, on the one hand, free trade, which is an orthodoxy that most on the right believe in, but also a need for national security, particularly in relation to energy and critical industries such as steel. Nigel has been talking about the need to protect our steel industry. If we didn't, we'd be the only developed economy on earth without one. And also we need to secure our supply chains as well. We need to be self-sufficient in energy. So there could be an avenue there which appeals both to the patriotic element of old Labour and also providing jobs as well. And it'll be interesting to see how that particular policy manifesto works itself out.
Yeah, someone just commented on chat just before you came on, Robin, with regards to, somebody says, we need younger people in politics instead of the old blokes grifting. And they were referring to the Tories. I mean, I suppose, they've got to work, they've got to find somewhere to go, and maybe Nigel would take them in. But I think in essence, part of me agrees with what they're saying, but then on the other side of things, you can't beat experience. When do you think, though, Alec, the cut-off period should be for someone who keeps putting their hand up and they scrape in here and they scrape in there, but really they're never going to play a great game of football. They're just going to be scraping in. When is a cut-off for that? And do you think we should be bringing in younger people? Again, though, the disadvantage is they haven't got that life's experience. And I think a good leader or a good politician should understand that life's experience, it gets really, really curly and twisty the older you get. So you appreciate things and you see things a bit differently than if you were 30.
Generally speaking, during healthy, stable times, I would agree. Yeah, you would want your statesman to be older, having lived a life, raised a family, perhaps built a business, just generally built up life experience and all that life gives you, responsibilities and just all of the skills and experience. But the problem is that we are becoming increasingly polarized. The liberalism is entrenched as the hegemon in our politics and is causing so many of the problems. And frankly, I don't think you're going to get the radicalism with the older generations to actually straighten out the problems. So I think actually that radicalism to actually change things for the better is going to come from the youth. So you can either try and find young talent and ascend them up the ranks in our politics if you want to straighten this country out quicker, or we just wait for them to make their way into the institutions as they grow older. But I'm not optimistic that things will radically improve in the near future, I'm afraid.
What do you think?
I also just...
Sorry.
I just also wanted to just add a point about the philosophical grounding of reform. The panelists are correct. Reform don't need to have any philosophical principles to win a general election. But the reason they need a philosophical grounding is because as they get into government and as time goes by, they won't have any guidelines, any principles to help aid them in what policies to set. And so what it means is actually they won't actually tackle the problems that need to be addressed, because populists like reform always jump on whatever is politically expedient rather than solving the problems for the long term. So after only a few general elections, I believe people will actually get quite disenfranchised with reform quite quickly. And it's because they don't have that philosophical grounding to guide them.
Actually, a very good point there. Robin, so what Alec is saying here is that they could become, basically, as we would say, the music industry, a one-hit wonder. Do you think there is that? Do you think that could actually happen with reform, because they haven't got a whole lot of experience to fall back on? How does Nigel protect reform from that? Does he then start bringing in the Tories, some of the Tories and other independents maybe that have some sort of experience and something that they can fall back on to add for the stability if and when they get into power?
I thought what Alec was saying was very sensible. The thing is, I think there's a sort of double-edged issue as far as reform is concerned. One is Nigel and his personality, not his persona, which is what the general public see, but his actual character. And one of the things that you see with Nigel is that he has a great tendency to fall out with anybody who looks as if they're going to in any way take any of the limelight off him. He has to be centre stage, and he's driven to that. And he also is very unforgiving. He's not like even Donald Trump, who's compared with. Trump can forgive people if it's useful, and he did, of course, forgive J.D. Vance, who had at one stage described him as a Nazi. So he's now getting on with people who previously been his enemies. There's no track record for Nigel to do that. Once somebody is an enemy, they are cast into the outer darkness, and he's going to try and be even with them for the rest of his and their lives. And so that's a problem, because it means that he's not going to find it easy, or indeed doesn't really fit with his track record as a personality, to work with people who are in any sense equal. And the second thing is that the institution that he's working through of Reform UK is a company limited by shares. In other words, it's a trading company in law, and he is a director, and he's in fact what they've done is they've created a sort of Reform UK Limited is the actual entity that's registered with the Electoral Commission, and then behind that, all the shares are owned by another company, and Nigel is the director of that. So he's basically got complete operational control, and whatever their notional party constitution says, it won't affect that operational control. So you haven't got a situation where the young thrusting people that come up, like Alex was talking about, can actually come to the front unless Nigel wills it.
Yeah.
Can I ask you something?
That's
Sorry,
the problem.
Rob. It's not a butt in here. I mean, so you're saying that if Nigel has a hissy fit and says no more and just winds the company up, where does that leave Reform?
Gone.
That's incredible. Ben, what do you think?
Well, yes, I don't know too much about the ins and outs of that. Certainly, I think Ben Habib fell out with Nigel over the constitution of Brexit. There was a big row there, and Ben was very keen to lay out the constitutional foundations of reform, and for whatever reason, he was not happy at the progress that Nigel was making, and I think there was a fundamental disagreement there. I understand, Robin, that Nigel is relinquishing control of the party as it is, but Alex shaking his head. That's what at least that's what he said in public. Whether that actually happens or not, I don't know. One other thing I would say is Reform are trying to distinguish themselves from the other parties by recruiting what they call ordinary people. In other words, not people who've been through the system, who are politics graduates from Oxford or Cambridge, who've been special advisors, who've never had a job in the outside world. I think that is a very strong pitch that they're making to the electorate, that the people that will eventually be representing us in Parliament are people like you and me that we will be readily able to identify with. How that maps onto Westminster itself, I don't know. There are plenty of people who are popular outside of Westminster, but don't make it inside Westminster. We've had distinguished businessmen in the past who've gone into politics, and it hasn't quite worked. So that again is a question that needs to be addressed. You need to be good at both is the answer. Whether people are good at business, whether they're actually good at politics, is an open question. I think they're right to ask that question because I think there is such a level of disaffection with the professional political class as it is. I think it is. Parliament desperately needs an injection of new blood from outside, people who've actually done real work and can speak with authority on the areas of government that concern us all.
Alec, you're nodding your head or shaking your head before. Would you like to add your two bobs bit?
Well, over the course of this discussion, we've talked of Nigel's character, that he obviously likes to maintain control. He likes to be seen as the most competent, charismatic man in the room. And that is, you see that reflected in how Reform UK is structured. So it's not just, he exerts his political influence to keep political threats at bay to himself. He will also use the mechanisms of the party structure to empower himself and keep others out. And people can criticise Nigel for setting Reform UK up. Obviously, it was originally called the Brexit Party, as basically a dictatorship. It is basically a dictatorship party. But, I can understand why you might want to do that because, look at the amount of trouble that you've had with parties with UKIP before, for example, just constantly having your NEC blocking you and what have you, and not allowing you to get the job done. So, you can sympathise with someone who just wants to set up a vehicle to springboard yourself into government, which is what Nigel's doing. It's working, but in the long run, people will become resentful if he does not relinquish that power.
We are going to run out of time, which I kick myself. I could talk all night or all day, which I'm sure you would probably tell me to take a long walk and a short pier, but I am enjoying this immensely. But so I want to ask you a touchy subject, the Muslim vote. It is growing and growing, and there's been a lot of rumblings. Take away all the strife at the moment. We're not saying that they're all in the same boat, but there is some uncomfortableness at the moment.
Yeah.
And that's just, I'm just trying to be. I don't want to go to jail, which is a good way to be, I think. But how do you think that will play in the next election? Because we've still got a few years to go, and at the moment, your Prime Minister and his cabinet, they're doing a pretty nice job of dividing and almost conquering people within the UK. You either have the ones that will jump at his crazy ideas, or those that will not jump at those crazy ideas. But the hard fact is, you have this great divide, and when the election comes around, will that great divide, do you think, will that play an important part in whether Nigel Farage becomes Prime Minister? Robin, what do you think?
Yes, I think that's a very important question. Of course, Nigel's given us his answer, really, because he plucked out of obscurity his Muslim colleague and Wazir Youssef, and this is not a guy who's got any prior involvement in politics, And Nigel also gave an interview in which he said that if we take on the Muslims, we'll lose. I think it sort of reflects back into the conversation that we've had before about where Nigel and Reform will be on ideology, because what we're seeing there is him being completely, in his eyes, pragmatic rather than ideological. And of course, I think a lot of people who had been talking out and being enthusiastic about reform did actually want to see a much more hard line on Islamism in particular. So it is an area where Nigel's clearly not in tune with the kind of ideological position that many people had hoped that reform would demonstrate. But he is nevertheless doing something that he thinks will enable him to glide into the top position. And I do think we need to just pause and think a little bit about what Nigel's strategy has been about himself personally, because he has tried to follow Donald Trump in becoming a media celebrity. And he's much more of a media celebrity than any other political figure in the UK. And he is much better known to the young, as Alex was talking about, than any others. And of course, in between now and the general election, we're going to have an interesting insight into whether media celebrity can actually work in France, because it looks like Jordan is going to be their presidential candidate for the right, and he is that young media celebrity figure, and if he does succeed, then that will be a big boost for the young coming forward, and also for media celebrity as being a key issue.
Yeah.
I totally agree, Ben.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think you're absolutely right, Mike, to bring this issue up. Immigration and Islamism are fuel on the fire at the moment in British politics. There's no question about that. Labour, the incumbent government, are in a hideous mess because they rely so heavily on the Muslim vote. But what we're seeing, unfortunately, in society is that diversity is not our strength, it is our weakness. And what you're seeing increasingly is balkanized politics, segregated politics, where communities are really not talking to one another at all. That cannot be helpful. There's been talk of blasphemy laws and heaven knows what, and incorporating Sharia law here, there, and everywhere. This is a disastrous route to go down. And I think one of Reform's key appeals at the moment is to push back strongly against this and to talk about the politics of cohesion. There's no question it's going to be very, very difficult. And immigration and the rates of immigration are simply adding to these problems. And there is increasingly strong talk about detention and deportation. But a central challenge for any future government will be to try and create a more cohesive society, because the way we've been going recently, things have been falling apart, not coming together.
Yep. I just want to, we have run out of time, so I appreciate your time, by the way. Final question for everybody, and it's just following this conversation. I'll start with Alec first of all. Alec, do you think Nigel is strong enough to last the distance? Part two of that, do you think Reform is strong enough to last the distance? And I must tell you the reason why I'm saying this is that, and it was brought up by Robin. I'm surprised that he's it with the company. That if he chucked a hissy, he said, "I'm not going to do this. I'm tired of this," or whatever. Found a game show that he could host, celebrity one that being. I'm just thinking, because I do that. I think he's a celebrity game show host in waiting. As for a political leader and someone to lead a country out of this quagmire, Alec, I don't know if he's strong enough or if Reform's strong enough. Just finally, what do you think?
Absolutely not. To follow on from what Ben was saying, he used the word cohesion. We will not get cohesion back in this country unless we start to restore our demographics. You only get cohesion with ethnic homogeneity. We have had mass immigration for decades. The indigenous population is increasingly shrinking every year. And with a diverse society, you have a divided society. That's the whole reason you brought up this question about the Islamic vote, because if you don't have homogeneity, that completely destroys political trust, and it completely distorts and corrupts any kind of representative democracy, which is the system we're supposed to have. So, yes, Nigel may well implement an immigration moratorium. He may well stop the boats and what have you. But is he actually going to implement the policy necessary to restore harmony and cohesion, which is remigration, to put the indigenous people first? And I don't believe that he has the spine to do that, because reform doesn't have an underlying philosophical grounding. And so they will just carry on saying what needs to be said, that they perceive will win them votes. But over time, people will get disenfranchised with them. And I think people will actually get disenfranchised with them quite quickly, to be honest. And final words on Nigel having the party set up as a company. He probably may well want that to be an option, that he can shut down the party once his tenure as Prime Minister is done, because he probably looks at the state of UKIP since he left it and finds that legacy embarrassing. So he would probably, for his own selfish reasons, for the sake of the history books, like to shut it down once he packs it in.
Robin, you want to add to that too?
Yes. So, I mean, Alec makes a good point about his attitude to UKIP, Nigel's attitude to UKIP, because actually, ever since he left, he's worked quite hard to make sure that they are ineffective, and he does like the narrative that he is the one who has personally achieved everything that has been achieved that's on their side. And I saw an interview with Jordan Peterson in which Nigel was saying that Reform UK had only just come into existence a few weeks before, which was when he came back in as leader. Before that, he was saying, that it was a startup. Before that, he was sort of discounting all the time that he hadn't been leader, and I think that he is very inclined to do that. However, I do think Reform could perform a useful function in the coming few years, which is to displace the establishment Labour Conservative duopoly. If those two are pushed to the margins, we've then got a politics which could open up to enable new talent to come in, like Alex was talking about, and also widen the scope of what is electable in this country, and that would be an important step. And it sort of did happen in Canada when another Reform party did actually cause the progressive Conservatives to collapse. They were in government, they called the election, and they went from government to, I think it was 3 seats. And they've never recovered from it.
Yeah. I mean,
And Ben, finally.
Yeah, I would just say he is the most phenomenal campaigner from the outside, as it were. He's been the supreme political outsider and has been extremely effective in that. He's 60, I believe, at the moment. Come the next election, if that's in 3 years' time, he'll be 63, 64. I think he's got one term in government, as it were, to do what he needs to do. It remains to be seen whether he's as effective inside the institution as he has been outside. He's been a phenomenal rebel, as it were, but at some point he's going to have to join the establishment and shape it into the establishment that he wants, rather than the one he's been criticising up to now.
Yep. I have to say I've had a magnificent time, and so have the audience. Ben Phillips, Robin Tilbrook and Alec Cave, thank you very much for your time. Many things we could talk about reform at the moment, and I think we probably should do that again later on. I think the topography, the geography will change. We'll see how Nigel and Reform adapt, and if they can move forward. And will he be a one-term Prime Minister, or will it be a one-term party? If it's up to him, Who knows? It may not even make it there. It might have a hissy fit one day. Doctor says you have to stop working. Oh, okay, I'll shut down reform. So it's a lot of things that need talking about. I think I think it's going to be an interesting time. I think the other issue is how much damage can Labor do, and can you actually retrieve? Can you claw back what has damaged the UK in one term as an alternative government? I don't know, but I think it's going to be some interesting times. We've often talked about with others. Will you have a revolution of some sort? Will there be more violence? Who knows? So I think the whole platform, the whole playing field would change, and it'll be interesting to see what we're talking about in 2 years' time. So, gentlemen, thank you so much for your time. Ben Phillips, Robin Tilbrook, and Alec Cave. This has been The Protagonist. I'm Mike Ryan. We'll see you again on Monday. We're talking about something that's very controversial in Australia, sovereign citizens, and the hype and the hysteria that's surrounding that. We'll try and get to the crux of the entire, and it's not even a movement. It's just a sort of a philosophy that they're embracing, I suppose. Gentlemen, thank you very much. This is The Protagonist, and this is The World Today.
With your help, we can continue to fight for freedom, reach new audiences, and bring important information to the public free of charge. This is not possible without your generosity. Join our quest for the truth and our freedom and donate today, telling it as it is. This is today's News Talk, The World Today.